Welcome back to Beyond the Spectrum. This is Dream, sharing my family's journey with autism with you, and this is episode 19. Wow, 19. As I mentioned yesterday, we're going to head back into language, and this one is probably one of my favorite memories, having to do with the way Micah's mind worked. Every once in a while, you get this front row seat into just this brilliant landscape, and you get to see the inner workings of what's happening inside this child's machine of a brain, and it's just so cool. So let me just dive right in. Autistic children tend to be very, very literal, and just to give you some examples of conversation, we don't really realize, I think, as neurotypical people, how many idioms are in our language that we use on a constant basis and never think twice about it. We learn context very, very early from lots of social cues, from the way that we say things. We learn sarcasm, we learn humor, we learn, like I said, idioms, and we don't have to explain them. But when you have a child that is neurodivergent and you are constantly explaining all of those little things that are confusing, you start to realize, oh my goodness, we really do have a complex language system that we take for granted. Some of the examples, how are you doing? Okay, that one we say all the time, right? Or how are you? It's when you break that down, how are you? What do you mean, how are you? How are you doing? Same thing. How? Because when you think of how, okay, I need to make this toast. How? Well, I put the bread into the toaster. That's how. What do you mean, how are you doing? How am I doing what? We don't realize that's confusing. How did you sleep? I closed my eyes, And so there's lots of different things. And then, of course, there's what's up. We know that one because I think we've seen that in jokes and movies and stuff. What's up? The sky is up, the ceiling's up, the light is up. I don't know what's up, So these things are obviously little slip-ups in conversations where you need to break that natural flow, and you need to pause, and you need to say, what this means is equal to what I've already told you in the past. Once you explain how are you, it means, how are you feeling? Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling sleepy? And then once they get that in their mind, oh, okay, how are you? Now, every time they hear something else, that's the same as how are you? Oh, okay. Now they're going to associate that, and they will have this whole, list in their mind. Well, Micah did. Not all autistics, remember, it's a spectrum. Not all autistics will be the same, but Micah was able to kind of just list all of these things. And these are tools that they get to use because there are so many subtle shifts in a social situation that can be misinterpreted or just simply missed. And it's not that they're unaware of things that are going on. It's that other things have their attention and their focus that's just a lot louder inside of their brain. But once you give them these tools, that can help balance the mix inside their head and give them, a better standing in a social situation, because now they can manage that better. But that doesn't always happen right away with people on the spectrum. And with that, you see, one situation or one question and answer I can maybe explain to him. But again, that generalization comes in. And if he's not able to generalize, then it's always the situation where you're going to have to explain every single, vocabulary lesson in the midst of a conversation, which once again breaks that flow, makes them feel more disconnected, makes them feel a little bit odd, all of these things. But in time, this did change and it was better. Let me get to the example. One day we were driving down the mountain. We lived on top of a mountain in San Diego that was 5,000 feet elevation. At the very top of this mountain, we could see everything in front of us, all the way out into the ocean, all the way down to Mexico, all the way up into Riverside County. It was this mass expanse, but it was from a very high elevation point. So we could also see in the foreground all of the land that led up to the shore. Now I want you to picture something. If you were going to take a picture of what that looked like, the ocean would be higher up on the page than the land. If you were going to draw it, the same thing. You would have to actually draw higher up on the page this ocean and then lower the land. And Micah was looking out, just staring, and it was kind of quiet in the car. And he said, "How is the ocean floating above the water?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I was looking out thinking maybe he was seeing, something with clouds or something like that. And I'm looking and I said, "What do you mean? The ocean's right there. It's not floating." And he goes, "Yes, it's higher than the land." And in that moment, my brain switched into almost this from a 3D to a 2D perspective of what he was seeing. And I could understand completely, oh my gosh. Isn't that an interesting observation for him? And if he had not voiced that, it would have been something that probably confused him for a very long time. And once I saw that, then I was able to get into that world with him, explain what he was seeing, bring him back out to appreciate the 3D version of that. And then he simply said, "Oh." But if you think about it, our brains are like that too. Think back to when we were in school and we were in art class and we saw the teacher show us a cube, a 3-dimensional representation of a cube on paper. To us, that was like magic because it looks like a 3-dimensional object is popping out of this 2-dimensional sheet of paper. But then when they take the time to show us that it's actually 2 boxes that are connected through these different lines, and then they teach us, this is what you do, this is how you add it, and then all of a sudden we look at it and we think, wow. Now we wonder, how many other things can we do that with? What else kind of magic can we do with these 3-dimensional images that are actually just this illusion on paper? And it was almost that same thing that happened with Micah. He started to generalize. He started to look at the world differently. He started to realize what I see is not exactly what's there. Now, it didn't happen overnight, but that was a huge key. And I was so glad that I happened to be there for that conversation because I knew him, I knew his brain, I knew the way that he thought. And I just remember thinking, this could have been one of those moments that was lost, because had he been with a neighbor or a friend, parent, they may have not had a clue what he was talking about and missed that opportunity. Now, granted, it would have probably come up later in conversation, but it might have been a little bit more diluted later. It might have been something that he actually started to build a new construct in his mind that, yes, water actually does float above, land in this weird kind of, fashion that he's visually seeing. And that's not to say that he would not have been able to figure it out on his own later, had I not been there. There were things, let me give you another example, of times where he did figure something out because he knew that it was the opposite of what he had been taught. Let me just say the phrase and let's see if you can figure out what he was meaning. We would have a little conversation and I would say the answer and he would say, "Oh, right. Yes means no in mind." You probably have no idea what that means, so let me go ahead and explain it to you. When somebody says to you, "Do you mind if I do this?" What do we say? We say, "No, I don't mind," which means that it's approval. If we say yes, which is typically the positive response in any other situation, then we're actually rejecting. Yes, I do mind, so don't do this. But he had figured out at this point in time, some things are not as they seem. So he would say, "Oh, that's right. yes means no in mind. Isn't that clever? But going back to this particular situation, I was so thankful that I was there for that moment and that I could help to unlock that world for him and help him to see that there were other things that he was seeing that were probably a little bit different than what he was imagining them to be. And now that he knew that was the way the world was, he could start applying that to other situations. He could start asking more because now he realizes there are answers out there if he's brave enough to ask. I absolutely love that memory, and I hope that I was able to express it in a way that really shares the beauty of the mystery of the mind and the way that we can connect if we're willing to pause and try to understand and try to make those connections, try to clear the confusion and get in it with them to help them know that they're not alone, and then bring them out with you. And I'll keep reminding you to be on the lookout for those moments. I'll see you tomorrow.